we're wired for survival. How do we move into thriving?
If your brain's trained to be reactionary in that fight or flight mode, you have to take resources away from something else. If you're in the fight or flight, thinking's not important. It's not just living longer, it's not just longevity, it's living well longer.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sara A.I Health podcast. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Alan Gee, MD, PhD, board certified neurologist, and founder of Frontier NeuroHealth in Wyoming. Welcome, Dr. Gee. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation. We've talked a lot in the past and in our collaboration, but this is such a great opportunity for us to kind of just, what I was talking about before we got started is we want to share some gifts. We want to give people some insight, some information, and some inspiration around their health, specifically their neuro health, their cognitive health. And I'm excited because, when I met you, we were, again, brothers of another mother, right? Aligned in so many ways. You come from neurology, but you're a holistic practitioner. So I really wanted to dig in to kind of understand your story, um, really understand what neurohealth is and why neurohealth, and just your philosophy of practice. So I'm gonna shoot it at you and just ask you to tell us about yourself. I want to know your story. I want to share your story.
Well, it's a long story.
We got time.
Well, so neurohealth is how I tend to think about the integration of the nervous system and the physiology and the human and our existence and our survival. And that story started back, in my youth. I was unaware of the influences that I was under at the time, how that shaped me, how that led me to my future. I think the turning point for me was probably in college. My sophomore year, I took a class called the Physiology of Behavior, and it started to click. My curiosity, my own experiences that I had as a child that I didn't, there wasn't a name for them back in the 70s and 80s. The term adverse childhood experiences really didn't get coined until the late 90s, and talking about how that has such an impact on who we are and how we see the world. But in that class, that physiology of behavior class, uh, I was enlightened. It was like, wow, it's like, yeah, I see why now that this happened, or I see why I reacted in those ways. And the year before, I was in a pretty challenging and dark place in college as a freshman. I was struggling, as a lot of people do, have a an intellectual bent. That things are easy in high school, and they get to college, and they're like, wow. And you start learning how much you don't know, and you either step up to the challenge, or you can crumble under it. Um, and so I was starting to, I could sense it back then. I could sense that I could see that relationship. I could feel that relationship, but I didn't have the vocabulary yet. And so my education kind of, took me down that pathway of finding the terminology, trying to understand the terms, and it's continuing to grow throughout my career. And my career is led by curiosity
Yes.
and then reflection. And it's like, oh yeah, now I know what that was, or now I know how that impacted me, um, from early childhood experiences through, the adolescent years in a challenging, toxic environment, to the revelation of, oh, I see what this means. So that's just a overview of kind of where the twig was bent, if I can use the term that Walter Cannon used in his book, to be an investigator. And Walter Cannon is an interesting conversation as well, which we'll probably touch on here a little bit.
Yeah.
The neural health, it doesn't have the stigma of mental health, but it's similar. It's the same interaction. It's not just brain health because the nervous system's throughout the body. It's in every tissue. It's in its receptors. It's sensing what's going on inside the body, the interoceptors, the exteroceptors of what's going on outside the world around us that might threaten us or challenge us or kill us. And how does the nervous system, the brain, orchestrate this physiologic dance of survival That's what really has intrigued me since that class, the physiology of behavior.
I love that. That resonates so much for me. Just the journey of curiosity. It's that transactional thing where we're seeking an understanding of self. And then taking that and expanding it, what you've done, that deep curiosity, that little the bent, right? But wanting to also offer that to others so that they are on their own path of discovery. And like you said, that edge where we're challenged, whether they're adverse experiences or physical challenges, that's where all the growth is. And like you said, you either crumble or you grow. And that to me is a very exciting concept and idea. And as well as, exactly what you were talking about, just I studied physiology because I wanted to figure out how I ticked, how I worked. Got into psychology because I saw the synergies there, right? It's not just a physical thing. And the nervous system being the conductor or the conduit of making sense. We're wired for survival. That's the bottom line. We're all wired for survival. How do we move into thriving? We're not wired to thrive, but I think we have a deep desire to thrive.
Oh, you're absolutely right on all those levels, and so many different avenues of conversation we can pursue there. You had the background in physiology. I believe it was Claude Bernard who first used the term the internal milieu, that then was further developed by Cannon, Walter Cannon, the physiologist at Harvard, turn of the last century, used the term
Yeah.
homeostasis, right?
Homeostasis. Yeah.
And homeostasis is, such an important factor, concept of the, if you look at our existence and our survival, what a fine line it is between survival and not surviving, and then
Yeah.
all the different elements of the physiology, all the different aspects of what is encapsulated in the human, that allows us to survive. And it's amazing. And so I learned about Cannon. I learned, read his books, learned a lot about his perspectives and what an amazing scientist he was. But this homeostasis, we talk about survival, right? I talk about an entity and you have limited amounts of resources, right? It's
Yeah.
like you can't do everything all the time in the best way possible. And so it's how do we allocate those resources? And so when I ran across the physiology of or not the physiology of behavior, but the adverse childhood experiences concept, and it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense. The brain starts to identify what is threatening in the world around us,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it does what it needs to do to survive, and it tries to allocate those resources. But if your brain's trained to be reactionary in that fight or flight mode and the sympathetics all the time, you have to take resources away from something else.
Yeah.
And so, I was studying this when I did my PhD work in psychoneuroimmunology. And it was interesting how I fell into that opportunity as well when I was struggling to, go to medical school, using my brother's old textbooks and living in a really cheap little apartment, trying to pay the bills. Um, then, it was I had the opportunity to pursue a PhD and have my education basically paid for, money to live on. And so it was
Beautiful.
like, wow, here's a great opportunity to pursue my curiosities and to learn something about the interaction. And if we think about the parasympathetics, the rest and restore, the rest and repair, how much energy that takes for the immune system to function, for the digestion, nutrition, thinking. I put into that category as well. If you're in the fight or flight, thinking's not important. That's
Hmm.
I see a lot of patients
Critical thinking goes out the window. I have brain scans that show it, so I'm
just
sure
like
you do too.
right. And so but it's you can't really fault the nervous system for learning to stay away from things that are dangerous, right? Fear is 40 times more potent in changing behavior than praise. And there's a reason. Because if you survive that fearful encounter the first time, it's like, oh, I don't want to go back there again.
Yeah.
Um,
High definition experiences is what I call that.
great term, great term.
Yeah.
Um, And so, these adverse childhood experiences, which, we don't, you can't really compare yours with everybody else's. Everybody goes
No.
through something different and it means
Yeah.
something different and they have different resources and coping skills. But it's important, I think, to reflect on our own and how that's influenced us and how that's, trained in the nervous system.
Yeah.
I see,
Yeah.
I see so many patients that, they're in that, I call it dysregulated.
Yeah.
And they're doing what the brain is learned to do is to try to keep them alive, but it's
Yeah.
become a negative influence. It impacts
Yeah.
the physiology and the ability to heal, to rest and repair and restore and to be in that happy spot where you can where you can thrive in life and not just
Yeah,
survive.
I think that's such a big thing. That survival to thriving mind or body, mind body is a term I like to use. I also like to use the term it's like we need to understand our biology so we can harness it so it works for us rather than against us, that we have this primal wiring. Harvard study showed that the average American these days is about 73% of their day, they're in those survival pathways. And it isn't life-threatening. It's just, everyday life's challenges, and they don't have the capacity, tools, or skills to self-regulate into that homeostatic kind of balance where they can meet challenge. And often they're feeling just exhausted. Um, they get sick more often. They're working for the weekend, that kind of thing. But in that light, I was curious, what tools did you use? You're alluding to having these kind of challenging experiences. We develop these adaptive, maybe behaviors for a while, and then we realize they might be maladaptive later as we grow. But what did you do for yourself through this journey that you were going through of discovery and curiosity and dealing with your own challenges? And like you said, we don't often have tools or maybe mentors that help us. Hey, you need to learn to maybe meditate or, get a little bit more sleep.
In retrospect, I can, talk about where I'm at now and how I've finally been able to integrate and embrace more of the processes. Back in the day when I was going through it, I was floundering, as most people
Yeah.
do, but I think the curiosity and the intellectual side of learning more about it was a coping skill for me. It's
Okay.
like, oh yeah, I understand that. I don't know what the hell to do about it yet,
Yeah.
and you continue to learn. Um, and you find out what works and what doesn't work. And I just think that neurodysregulation is such a driving factor for behavior, and whether it's, I think it drives addictions, right? It's like, oh, I found this and it makes me feel good for a while. I'm gonna do more of it. And so it can be positive or negative in trying to calm the beast, I say with my patients. For me, it's yeah. And I grew up on a farm in Nebraska, so I'm always amused at myself when I'm talking about nutrition. It's like I grew up on, steak and potatoes and sweet corn and gravy and didn't think anything about it. But nutrition is such a huge aspect of regulating the nervous system. Sleep. Sleep
Oh,
is probably the cornerstone. And most people don't sleep well for various reasons. Certainly the patient population I see, we start with sleep and man, vast majority, they do not sleep well. And so I call it the foundational drivers of neural health, sleep, nutrition, movement. And movement doesn't have to be the exercise. And I smirk a little bit as I'm saying that because that's kind of where I found some of my regulation was in athletics and
hmm.
sports. And, my life sport is biking, primarily mountain biking. I didn't engage in road biking all that well because my mind would still think a lot as I'm riding.
Yeah, a lot of room to think on a road bike.
Right? Mountain biking, not so much.
Not
You
so
start
much.
to wander and you don't, make the right move in the right time. You fall off, you crash, and that's
Yeah.
that's painful. So
Yeah,
that was
mountain biking is a meditation for me because you have to be incredibly present for the experience, or you pay.
absolutely, it's exactly where I was going with that and that engaged me. Even back in the 90s when I was riding a cheap Fisher Hukui two on the
I know that bike.
porcupine rim with cantilever brakes, and it's like I'm like, wow, I did that. It's like nobody would do that anymore. But it was, yeah, it's meditative, right? So that's the movement, and whether that's calm stretching, whether that's yoga, whether that's, but you got to move, right?
Yeah,
And then the mindfulness, and mindfulness, it's such a generic term. We can break it down. I had the, so it's not just meditating necessarily, but it's being engaged in what you do. It's having that passion.
yeah.
I had the benefit of meeting Professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi back in the early 90s. He wrote a book that people might know. It's called Flow,
Yep.
The Psychology of the Optimal Experience. Had great conversations and learned a lot. And that was like, again, that curiosity and that click of, hey, if I'm in that state of mind and I'm so relaxed and engaged in what I'm doing, that feels good. That's I think what people are looking for. Um, some find it in various ways of, meditation or sports, or unfortunately, others find it in other ways that degrade their systems and are not conducive for good health and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeking. I think we're seeking that, and like you said, that experience, that cultivating awareness, which brings you into deep presence, to where your life is happening, where it's happening, and spending more time there in communion with your life is such a valuable. I mean, that's why Csikszentmihalyi, the famous book, great author, amazing researcher. Identified that as an optimal experience because it feels so good. Music, to me, is a moment of flow, whether it's the musician or the audience that's listening to beautiful music. Holding my lover is such a deep flow state, because we are in it. We're in the flow of life. And we're so often, half the time, we're off in the past or the predicting the future. That's again, mindfulness kind of lingo, but that's true. Harvard showed that almost 50% of the day we spend, rehashing the past and trying to predict what's going to happen next. Anxiety, worry, stress.
Absolutely, and it's those life experiences, that we are part of all we have been, right? And so, how do we manage that? How do we retrain that? Whether it's the ACEs or whether it's the PTSD, when you're always on and you have threats, it's hard to unlearn that.
Yeah,
And so much of it's about retraining the nervous system, at least in my approach with healthcare and wellness, and even treating neurologic diseases once they've set in. If we can take care of those foundational drivers, we have a much higher success rate, and I think
yeah,
mitigating the progression of the disease and even helping improve it where possible.
yeah, yeah. And I love that term, retraining the nervous system. That's right up my alley, right? And so you're saying that that's possible.
It is, but it's work, right?
It's work.
And when you hear like, well, my daily routine or my daily practice, and it's like a lot of people are like, oh, that's foo-foo, why would you do that? But if fear is 40 times more potent than praise,
Yeah,
you kind of got to do things good 40 times for each one, each negative. And when you've had thousands and thousands of negative experiences, and when you perceive what's happening to you currently in the light of those previous experiences, it can become negative as well. And so
sure.
it's this constant battle of, okay, I'm safe. I have what I need. You've got your basic needs met. I can relax. I can be present. I don't have to be worrying about, the next meal or
Yeah,
the weather or, the finances. But with
yeah.
so much tech in our face these days and things move so fast, it's hard to retrain. It's hard to put yourself in that place often enough to mitigate or to decrease that influence that your brain has and what it perceives as an appropriate path to survival.
Yeah, I think, you're alluding to the incompatibility of modernity and our humanness, our, these ancient hunter-gatherer biologies that we live with. And we've created this incredible world. I mean, I wouldn't want to give up all the technology, but we now know, like Harvard study showed, just even looking at your smartphone and cortisol levels go up, adrenaline, respiration, heart rate all go up. It's triggering us into that sympathetic state just to engage our technology.
Well, and I don't know that we want to go down the pathway of AI at the moment, but you know, AI can easily pick up on those triggers
Yeah,
that motivates us, and it can support, can engage us in things that tend to promote that emotion.
Yeah,
and that increases the usership of the apps, which then continues to drive that negative cycle. So
that's right.
it's another
Yeah,
challenge.
and that's used intentionally. They're very intelligent neuroscientists that work for tech companies, social media platforms that know exactly how to trigger. They know our biology and they know how to use it.
Right?
Right. And that's again why it's so important to be aware, that self-awareness of what it feels like, what is it, that internal, external experience and balance that we're trying to process through our nervous system.
I love having this conversation with you because the terminology that you have and share is amazing. It's
Thank you.
much more eloquent than how I'm trying to describe some of these concepts.
Oh, I don't know about that, but but thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that you find value. Yeah, that's my goal is to create relevance, to take these subjects that often people would put at arm's length. I mean, we're talking about neurohealth. A lot of people might go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't even pass high school biology, and you don't need to. You live in your biology. This is yours. And we can understand this experience, I think, and people like us want, I think, give that to people that understanding, that relevance, so that they take charge and understand that they're the agent of their well-being and they can choose to not be the victim of their adverse childhood experiences or adult adverse experiences, and that they can choose to pivot towards states that are thriving, because as you well know, that if we stay in those kind of sympathetic states over time, there's a cost physically, biologically. One big one is the degeneration of our cognitive health. We're dealing with an epidemic, really of degenerative neurological issues, one specifically being things like Alzheimer's or other degenerative conditions. My mother passed from Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and things you already touched on. So her anxiety and stress, she's a very high functioning academic. Um, didn't sleep well. I mean, I witnessed that my whole life, that she was an insomniac, but she'd be reading, she'd be reading all kinds of, uh, spiritual books, technical books, academic books, but that was burning out her nervous system. And eventually for her, it manifested as ALS.
That's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, yeah,
The,
it's hard.
and yeah, that insight. And so as a neurologist, the cognitive health or the brain health, the neuro health, it's so reflective of the physiology in general. And when the physiology, I talk about, this homeostasis again, right? And we should have this large permissive range of functionality for all the different systems, whether it's the pH, the glucose, the oxygen, the blood pressure, and you name it. Every system is monitored closely by the nervous system, and the changes and shifts are made to try to keep them systems in those optimal range of function. When we're in the fight or flight and our energy is going there, just in that immediate survival, these other systems are compromised.
Yeah.
So I see that a lot with like the immune system. When that system's compromised and that physiology is compromised, in which that immune system is
Mhm.
asked to function within, it can do things like promote inflammation.
Yeah.
So not only increasing the heart rate, but the inflammation process of atherosclerosis is going
Yeah.
to be accelerated. Your cholesterol, your physiology, your metabolism is off. Your digestion, leaky gut. You don't capture the nutrients you need as well.
Yes.
Emotional eating. All right.
Yeah.
When you're fight or flight, your brain's like, I need some immediate energy. I have to run or fight. And so it's like, oh, sugar, carbohydrates. Oh, those are some comfort foods. I want more of them. I want more of
Donuts. Yeah.
them. I had a patient this week that enlightened me. I was saying, okay, so nutrition. I want you to shop around the outside of the store. I want you to eat fresh foods. And he's like, hey, doc, you know that at Albertsons, the bakery's on the outside. Does that? I was like, no, that doesn't count. Skip the bakery, go to the veggies.
Sounds like negotiation on their part. So you're saying that I can eat.
So you're saying, like, that's not what I'm saying. Um, so it's how, and so these systems are compromised. And then I was going to mention autoimmunities too. I think that they're
Right.
probably that the compromised immune system and the physiology and with it where it's working is then allows it. It probably even encourages it to not function appropriately and can drive autoimmunities. I
Yeah.
think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, wow, that's a big spectrum. So, with that said, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about kind of your philosophy of practice. I think we talked about things like reductionist versus holistic. Your approach, because sometimes in a clinical setting, it's very reductionist, and I get that, you're well trained, you've spent a lot of time. So we focus on what we're trained on. And sometimes we don't pull back to look at the patient or the client as a human being, as an individual entity that has many parts, right? And so, I mean, I'd love to hear more about that. That's one of the things that got me so excited about who you are and how you practice. And, I know there are great technical physicians, and then what I call healers. I think you fall into the healer category just because you bring compassion, strong technical skills, and desire to help, and I think all physicians do that, but sometimes, we're just there because we're in it. And sometimes we don't take a moment to pull back and go, wait a second, if we're not getting the outcomes that we want, what can we do differently? What are we missing? Right.
So yes, I trained, as a neurologist after doing my PhD, and as I was choosing my medical specialty, I was like, well, psychoneuroimmunology, neuro's in the middle of that. Let's do neurology. So I had taken a leave of absence from medical school and spent 4 years in the lab to do the PhD, and then went back to clinical medicine. And then I matched in neurology. And to your point, medicine in the Western world is about disease. Can I name a disease? And then what if I name a disease? How do I treat it? What medication do I give? How do I cut it out of your body? Um, and it's relevant, it's important, but it's also, I think, too late in many ways to have a significant impact, right? And so, well, I enjoy what I do. I enjoy being a neurologist and treating patients, doing the best we can. And the other challenging thing about neurology is many of the things we name and can put a name on and name it a disease are not treatable. They're neurodegenerative. The ALS, the Alzheimer's, the Parkinson's, MS have historically been a progressive neurologic decline. And while I may be able to change that trajectory, and we have, in my career, we have treatments for MS that are much more effective than ever. For Alzheimer's now, we have some interventions that may change the trajectory. But my background with the psychoneuroimmunology, it's like, what can we do to change that trajectory before it happens? And so that's really what's that, and then the fact I'm in private practice has allowed me to change the course of my practice to what I call neural health. And I'm not just, I'm a neurologist, here's your disease, take this pill. It's taking care of the whole person. When I was in training, the residents hated going to headache clinic. It's like, oh, it's just such a terrible clinic to go to. I quite enjoy taking care of headaches because we can make such a huge difference, and it's not a death sentence or a neurological progressive disease. Most headaches we can impact them by taking care of the foundational drivers, right? So every patient, we talk about sleep, we talk about nutrition, we talk about movement and mindfulness and stretching and calming the nervous system. And when we can cool those jets in the nervous system, it's like, oh, I don't have headaches anymore. Oh, I'm not binge eating. I'm not emotional eating. I have, life gets better. And so I've changed the name of my practice to Frontier Neural Health for two reasons. One, I live in Wyoming, which is a frontier world.
Yeah.
We practice frontier medicine in some ways, but I'm also really on the cutting edge of technology and application. I've discovered over the years that I'm an accidental informaticist as well. I read a lot of Cellier's work. Hans Cellier in the 50s was talking about stress, and he had a dichotomy of eustress and distress.
Mhm.
And so stress itself isn't bad, right? And if we go back to the flow too, eustress, the good stress, right? That's when you can balance the challenge you have with your confidence, that's flow. You get in there and it's engaging. It's like, oh yeah, I don't always win. I don't always, excel or succeed, but it challenges my level of confidence. And so
Yeah.
that's why you see, people doing things like, oh my God, that's insane. Alex Honnold doing free solo. It's like, where's your amygdala? There's no fear there, but he's got the confidence to do that.
Yeah,
But whether it's a pilot, whether it's, whatever you do, if you can balance your challenges with your level of confidence, that's engaging. Now, that
yeah,
fear or that distress is the high challenge with no confidence. And that's the negative. That's more along the lines of the fear of, I don't think I can do this, and that's has a huge emotional toll that it takes, and it activates all the stress systems in the body
yeah.
to try to overcome it. Now, your question, Bobby, about if you're trying to not create a bad habit, if you don't have an emotional content to it, it's not going to set in your memory and in your infrastructure quite as solid of having that experience.
So narcissists don't get stressed is basically what I'm taking from this.
Not about some things, correct.
Yeah. Not about some things. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a great topic of conversation is right. Stress. Stress is neither good or bad, right? It's a neutral thing. It's the perception of the challenge in front of you. And like Dr. Gee was talking about, this is literally the work that I do with special forces soldiers and first responders is balancing that because they're running into conditions or situations that the average person would be overwhelmed by, but they rely on their training. So they have a skill set which gives them confidence, even though they can lose it at times, they can detach a little bit from it. But finding ways to regulate and move it back into that, you're at the edge. You're at the edge of and flow requires actually a degree of challenge. That's exciting, the curiosity, like Dr. Yu was talking about, I've had these personal challenges, but I'm like at the edge of curiosity and it's propelling me forward rather than saying, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent this month and, or which some people will go that direction. And that can be trained, right? That perception and reframing and then resources to regulate in action. And it can be clunky sometimes, but now we have a whole field of practice like that. Stress can be enhancing is really the language that it can. They've seen that when you are in that ability to regulate, it can actually improve immune function right? And
Absolutely.
cognitive function, but a
And
lot of
digestion.
and
And
digestion. Yeah,
yeah. And so it's all interrelated, right?
yeah,
And you cycle into the positives, and then it kind of builds as
it does.
opposed to the downward spiral that we see so often. But it's changing behavior is so hard, and getting people to engage and to even take baby steps to change habits, incredibly challenging and difficult. And really, it's kind of the holy grail in health and wellness, and even in medicine, right? I see it often with people that have had a major stressor in their life. They've had a heart attack, they survived a stroke, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I need to do something different." But before that, it's like, "Oh, that's too hard to go for a walk. It's too hard to, not eat the donuts. It's too hard to," and they don't have that level of motivation. And I'm curious as if how we can use technologies and other ways to engage people in a positive way and not just the negative stuff we hear about being distracted and being stressed out by the technology. And that's led to some other work I'm doing with the Wyoming Health Innovation Living Laboratory.
Yeah, I think we're recording, so I'm curious. Do you want to share a little bit more of that? We were talking about your approach to practice, the holistic, looking at the whole human being. Um, Prevention. I think that's really where you were going, is like, what can we do to prevent the trajectory? And now you brought up the idea of how do we integrate technologies and tools so that they don't overwhelm us, but that they actually benefit us and we can be better. We can do this better. Anyway, I'll let you go with that, what you're exploring.
So, the Holy Grail is engagement, right? As a physician, I see patients. It's like, "Oh, your blood pressure is high. You're taking a medication." Yeah, most of the time, doc, I'm taking it. It's like, "Well, your blood pressure is still high. Keep taking it. We'll see where you're at in 3 months from now, or 6 months." And they come back, and it's the still same problem. Nothing has changed. You can provide them information. Here's a handout of a dozen pages of why your blood pressure and your cholesterol and your sugars need to be better managed, and most of them are in the trash can by the front door on their way out of the clinic. And so it's the engagement. And so I'm intrigued by how we can use technologies, one, to find people and assess them and show them the opportunities they have to change their health span. And when I say health span, it's not just living longer, it's not just longevity, it's living well longer, high performing, thriving. And so, how do we help change the trajectories? But people don't know what they don't know. And so, how can we find them? And then, how can we engage them? And that's really again, the holy grail, the secret sauce is that engagement. And I believe that relevant knowledge is the key to that engagement.
Yeah.
If it's you, if it's me, it's like what makes us tick? What gives us that challenge? What brings us to that flow state? What is meaningful? Given everybody's individual. And we have to be personalized. We have to be precise. But that knowledge is what we need to be able to understand and use as a tool to engage their interaction and their change in their health span trajectory. Not easy.
It isn't.
So many.
And I think engagement, like again, as a coach, as somebody who helps people with this, and that's always been the conundrum. It's one thing when I have I'm working with an Olympic athlete, they're going to take action because they're really so motivated to get better and get their best outcomes. But, the average person that we're just trying to deal with our life and all the stuff that's going on, and it feels like an extra thing. And it takes this kind of acute moment, like, hey, you have a heart attack or you get a diagnosis. And that creates that moment. But how can we do that way before we get to that point? And it really is an engagement. It's action. It's like, action precedes motivation. We need to do something. That's where that entropy is that disconnect where we're contemplating wanting to do something. I know I should eat better. I know I should really work on my sleep, but you do the Netflix till, 11 o'clock, or you're doing the fast food drive-through. There's no urgency there, no relevance yet. Can we use technology to actually create that, to help create that awareness in a way that's personal, that relevance to the individual?
I mentioned earlier that I'm as an accidental informaticist. Um, I was not aware that I was an informaticist until I was asked to be on the informatics subcommittee at the Academy of Neurology. And I'm like, what do I know about it? But in reality, that's what I've been doing for many years. And I was curious when I actually saw the relationship between what the nervous system does and what we do with informatics and data science. And so the nervous system, it captures signal, right? Whether it's a sense inside, outside, it creates the electrochemical impulses in the computer world. It's binaries, and then it has to organize and harmonize that data, and it becomes information. And it's like, okay, we have some information now. We have to make meaning of it, and that's the contextualization piece to create the knowledge that we can act upon. And so what the nervous system it does is the same thing as informatics and the science of information. And so I'm like, yeah, I guess there's a reason I've been curious or saw that parallel for all my career. Um, and as I was thinking about the how do we engage people, it's like, well, relevant knowledge about them would be very helpful. But then looking back upstream, it's like, okay, we have ways to capture information about the individual, whether it's a wearable, whether it's genomics, whether it's history and physical, the information or the medication you're putting in, the zip code and where you live, a lot of data. And but you can't just take data and jump to that knowledge without a couple additional steps. And that's where things, got a little bit more complicated is, how do we trust that the data? How do we harmonize it? How do we put it in a way that we can trust the information and the provenance of that information? And then we can use technologies to help us surface relevant knowledge that as a physician, as a health coach, as a patient, we can take that knowledge and use that as a way to engage us in our own journey in a positive way. And that whole process of being able to create the personalized precision neural health informatics infrastructure has been a focus of mine for the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years now. But it's an amazing amount of progress we've made just recently and how close we are to actually having a way to scale and to democratize the technologies in a way that'll help lots of people.
Yeah, and I love that. That's beautiful. Your description is beautiful, and it really ties into what we're doing at Secors, on a bigger scale. That's really a lot of the work that we're doing. And, part of it is bringing it into well-being, medicine, health. Um, excuse me, I have allergies today. Um, so that that data, that information that we're collecting, that you're collecting, how are you using that right now? What kind of work? I know that you've been doing some things, Zilliant, and some of these tools that you've really created to help with that process. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what's happening there in your practice.
So I think technology has a potential to, democratize access to health and wellness in ways that is not necessarily currently being deployed. We have ways to capture signal. There's a lot of wearable devices. There's omics. There's data. Um, but how do we get that to the actual knowledge? Now, the other element that I wanted to touch upon too is the complexity of the nervous system. Um, when I talk to colleagues that are not necessarily neurologists, they're talking about, well, brain health, or um, it's the brain. They see it as a brain, as an organ. But the brain is so complex, with all the things that it does with sensing what's going on inside, what's going on outside, with movement creation, with processing of that stream of data that comes in. It's super complex. And a story that when it really struck home to me was my when I diagnosed my brother's terminal brain cancer. And the neuro-oncologist that was working with him was an internal medicine trained oncologist. And their philosophy says, well, it's the brain, we have limited treatments for this disease. We're going to use this one, and if it doesn't work, we're going to use the next one. But what they failed to appreciate was the complexity of the brain and that his tumor was in a very intricate part of the brain. And if they waited until the first one didn't work, that he would be severely debilitated, lose his language, lose his function of his dominant arm. And I advocated to throw everything we had at it initially to maintain his highest level of function as long as we could. But in the end, I couldn't push any further without, potential negative consequences. But a neuro-oncologist trained as a neurology would see the nervous system. Now, I bring that up as just a description of why the nervous system is the complexity of the nervous system. And so, a challenge we had in Wyoming, we have it everywhere, is the cost of caring for elderly and long-term care. And this came to light in the 2017 Wyoming Aging Plan, where the state of Wyoming, and Wyoming's 568,000 people over a huge geography. So it's a small town with really long roads. The cost of aging and the state's cost to care for elderly and long-term care in 2017 was $139 million a year, with projections to triple in 12 years. As a neurologist, a neurology focused individual, I was like, well, the elements that are the most relevant for whether you can live independently is if you can move, so your mobility and your cognition. Are there ways that we could quickly and simply assess complex neurologic systems of cognition and of mobility in a way that we can help people see what their health span trajectory looks like? Use that as an engagement tool. So I've put together, interesting technologies to look at speech production as well as vision, cognitive processing, as well as mobility, and then the patient's own reported concerns that they might have, and use that tool called Zilliant as an assessment tool to make it available in your home, in your community, where you can start to map your own trajectory and use this as an engagement tool for those that need to have more immediate attention to change their trajectory a decade perhaps before they're at the door of long-term care. And so I think that's an application of technology that I think will really substantially impact again, that engagement process, but also changing life trajectories in a positive way.
Yeah, and you're using this now in clinic and outside um, with people that you're engaging in your practice. And so, what are you seeing? What benefits are you seeing? Are you excited?
I am very excited, excited to use it in the way I described, in the community. And we partnered with the Wyoming Health Fairs, and they have, community health fairs that have traditionally have been about blood draws, but we're adding this element of digital technology too to help people understand their needs. And it's curious. So the folks that we're seeing, about half of them that take the test, and many of that is at the instigation of family members. Um,
Mm.
Half of them are doing much better than they think. So it's like, hey,
Well,
you're
that's
doing
great
pretty well.
news.
That's good news. Maybe 25% are like, oh, you didn't do so well in a few. We should be engaging you with your provider team or a cognitive care specialist. And then 25% are farther down on the spectrum and it's unfortunate. So in the country, patients with cognitive concerns, only 22% are being seen in the first year of voicing those concerns to have further evaluation. Only 39% or so ever get evaluated or see a cognitive care specialist.
Wow.
So we're missing an opportunity, and it takes maybe a year to get in to be seen. And so if we can find those who need it, use this tool as a triage uh, tool, give people the care they need sooner to change that trajectory, I think we'll have a very substantial impact on the ability of folks to live independently longer.
Yeah, so Zillion's pretty accessible, meaning that there aren't a lot of barriers to actually doing that kind of assessment rather than going into a clinic and maybe getting these full evaluations that you can get a first pass kind of understanding of where you are, help make some better choices on that trajectory, that health span trajectory.
Yeah, and by doing these short evaluations of complex systems, people actually will finish it. It takes under 15 minutes. It's like, oh, I can do that. I can
Yeah,
do that every month. I can do that, 4 times a year. And then the cost as well, if it's affordable. And that's really what our mission was, is to create a quick, easy, and affordable tool to understand the foundation of neural health, or at least the need for further evaluations and connect people with the care they need at that point.
that's amazing. That's beautiful. The blending of technology and the art of medicine. Yeah,
Thanks. It's not easy.
it's not
It's
easy.
been a journey.
But here we are, curious and seeking, knowing we can do it better. And in that process, serving our community, democratizing. I think that concept's very big. That this should be accessible to everyone. A lot of people with resources are able to access better care. Better interventions up front, better food. I get that. What you were talking about at the very beginning. The Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need these basic things met before we can move forward into self-realization or deeper connection. And a lot of people are kind of stuck in, not having access to that. And I really love that part of it.
Another challenge that we are addressing together, this is what we're doing with Sarah, is empowering the individuals to manage their own information, their own data.
Yeah,
Because one of the challenges we run into is, well, I don't want my employer, I don't want anybody else to know that my brain isn't working as well as it could.
absolutely.
And I get that. Probably in that camp myself. But if we can protect that information, help them protect it, help them benefit from their own information, allow them to consent, improve the governance of their information.
Yeah.
I think that is the key element, not only for what I'm doing, but healthcare in general, um, and empowering people.
Yeah.
That's really the key, I think, to everybody's personal success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to that basic safety that we feel safe. I work with military and some high functioning military are hesitant to go get, for example, mental health support because they're experiencing symptoms of PTS. But if their superiors find out that they're seeking help for that they may be, pulled out of the field, knee-jerk reaction, and their data is not secure. And I've run across that in the medical environment where I've coach physician. They're like, I really don't want that in my medical record because my employer could see it and then they're going to question my stability rather than I'm seeking to get better, which I think is a great sign. We all, we have mental health just like we have physical health. We should all seek support and care for ourselves. But if we feel afraid that that's going to be used against us, that's very, very scary. And it's a barrier to going to get that help.
And we circle all the way back to why I call it neurohealth, because it's
Yeah,
applicable for everybody. There's no stigma.
everybody.
Everybody wants their neural health to be the best, whether they want to be a high performing athlete or executive, or just the average Joe wanting to live their best life.
Yeah,
It's neural health, and it's for everybody.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say, the hardest game we play is life because it has a lot of meaning and the stakes are high because it's your life. We all have the lives that we want to live. My goal is to help people thrive. I think that's fundamental one of your goals, help people thrive. And in that, we're coming to about an hour, so maybe we can wrap up. And I know we're gonna have another conversation. I don't know if there's anything that's burning inside of you that you want to share, but I thought you might, if you're willing, and this is not medical advice, everyone, but it's that maybe you might share a few things that folks listening could do now on their trajectory, their well-being trajectory, their health span, a few things that you feel are very valuable from your perspective that they could focus on, things that are accessible, actionable, low cost that they could really kind of focus their awareness on, maybe in some engagement there, using the words we've used, where they could spend a little time now.
Well, it's not earth shattering by any means. Um, it's sleep.
Yeah.
Be cognizant of your sleep. Be cognizant of your sleep hygiene. All right. A cool, dark room. Uh, what you eat, when you eat it, has an influence on the quality of your sleep. If you have sleep apneas, if your bed partner has sleep apnea or restless legs or other reasons that sleep is disrupted, need to work on it. Nutrition, shop around the outside of the store, but not the bakery. Eat,
Yeah.
eat healthy. Uh,
Yeah.
and then exercise, move, whatever
I
your
always say real food. Yeah.
real
Yeah.
food. Yeah, like Hippocrates said, I think it was, let food be thy medicine. Movement, and whatever your
Yeah.
jam is, engage, do it. It's the same type of yoga, the same, running, biking, whatever it isn't for everybody. Swimming, find your jam and do it on a regular basis. And then, lean into the mind and the mindfulness. Find your flow. Find what engages you, triggers you, not just engages you and gets you to do something. Um, but then also take time to calm your brain and give yourself some compassion. Right? You're not going to get it right all
Mm,
the time. Don't stress about the times, but work in the right direction. And
yeah.
life is a journey, and it's a challenge. Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. But just
Ain't that the truth?
just keep working,
I
heading in
think
the right
that's,
direction.
yeah, I think that's beautiful. And again, coming back to, like you said, it's not complicated. I have that same approach. It's not complicated. You're coming from a very technical background, well trained, and you've brought it back to these very simple things. These are human needs. The way I look at it is what you described there, these are fundamental needs that we have as human beings. And if we're not getting those needs met, that it leads to dis-ease, then disease eventually. And because of that incompatibility of our modern living, that we're so busy, we're so distracted that we don't even hear our bodies begging for more sleep, begging for better food, begging to go outside and move, like taking a walk, like you said, whatever your jam is, just do it. Just do something. And the funny thing is it doesn't have to be perfect, just consistent and a little bit better. I've always used consistently good rather than occasionally perfect. It's just a consistent lifestyle that we cultivate. And so thank you. Thank you for that validation. And I think that's just great information for people to have. And it should be empowering because I think you're also saying that it's in your hands, that you have so much power. on your health trajectory through your behavior, your choices. And they don't need to be complicated. Um, they just need to be better and consistent for you.
Well said.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Dr. Gee, thank you. This has been a pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation. I want to invite you back, and I'm sure over time we will actually have many conversations, but whatever, I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the burning things you wanted to share, but I think that was a great conversation and a lot of good stuff to share.
Fantastic. Quite enjoyed it. Appreciate you.